thus attired, to go from house to house, attended by young fellows, each of them armed with a staff, to which a bit of rawhide was tied. Round every house the hide-clad man used to run thrice, deisial, that is, according to the course of the sun, so as to keep the house on his right hand, while the others pursued him, beating the hide with their staves and thereby making a loud noise like the beating of a drum. In this disorderly procession they also struck the walls of the house. On being admitted, one of the party, standing within the threshold, pronounced the blessing on the family in these words: "May God bless the house and all that belongs to it, cattle, stones, and timber. In plenty of meat, of bed and body clothes, and health of men may it ever abound." Then each of the party singed in the fire a little bit of the hide which was tied to his staff, and having done so he applied the singed hide to the nose of every person and of every domestic animal belonging to the house. This was imagined to secure them from diseases and other misfortunes, particularly from witchcraft, throughout the ensuing year. The whole ceremony was called Kalluin, because of the great noise made in beating the hide. It was observed in the Hebrides, including St. Kilda, down to the second half of the 18th century at least, and it seems to have survived well into the 19th century. End of chapter 54. Chapter 55. The Transference of Evil. 1. The Transference to Inanimate Objects. We have now traced the practice of killing a god among peoples in the hunting, pastoral, and agricultural stages of society, and I have attempted to explain the motives which led men to adopt so curious a custom. One aspect of the custom still remains to be noticed. The accumulated misfortunes and sins of a whole people are sometimes laid upon the dying god, who is supposed to bear them away forever, leaving the people innocent and happy. The notion that we can transfer our guilt and sufferings to some other beings who will bear them for us is familiar to the savage mind. It arises from a very obvious confusion between the physical and the mental, between the material and the immaterial. Because it is possible to shift a load of wood, stones, or what not, from our own back to the back of another, the savage fancies that it is equally possible to shift the burden of his pains and sorrows to another, who will suffer them in his stead. Upon this idea he acts, and the result is an endless number of very unamiable devices for palming off upon someone else the trouble which a man shrinks from bearing himself. In short, the principle of vicarious suffering is commonly understood and practised by races who stand on a low level of social and intellectual culture. In the following pages I shall illustrate the theory and the practice as they are found among savages in all their naked simplicity, undisguised by the refinements of metaphysics and the subtleties of theology. The devices to which the cunning and selfish savage resorts for the sake of easing himself at the expense of his neighbour are manifold. Only a few typical examples out of a multitude can be cited. At the outset, it is to be observed that the evil of which a man seeks to rid himself need not be transferred to a person. It may equally well be transferred to an animal or a thing, though in the last case the thing is often only a vehicle to convey the trouble to the first person who touches it. In some of the East Indian islands, they think that epilepsy can be cured by striking the patient on the face with the leaves of certain trees and then throwing them away. The disease is believed to have passed into the leaves, and to have been thrown away with them. To cure toothache, some of the Australian blacks apply a heated spear-thrower to the cheek. The spear-thrower is then cast away, and the toothache goes with it in the shape of a black stone called karich. Stones of this kind are found in old mounds and sandhills. They are carefully collected and thrown in the direction of enemies in order to give them toothache. The Bahima, a pastoral tribe of Uganda, often suffer from deep-seated abscesses. Their cure for this is to transfer the disease to some other person by obtaining herbs from the medicine man, rubbing them over the place where the swelling is, and burying them in the road where people continually pass. The first person who steps over these buried herbs contracts the disease, and the original patient recovers. Sometimes, in case of sickness, the malady is transferred to an effigy as a preliminary to passing it on to a human being. Thus, among the Baganda, the medicine man would sometimes make a model of his patient in clay. Then a relative of the sick man would rub the image over the sufferer's body, and either bury it in the road or in the grass by the wayside. The first person who stepped over the image or passed by it would catch the disease. Sometimes the effigy was made out of a plantain flower, tied up so as to look like a person. It was used in the same way as the clay figure. But the use of images for this malefic purpose was a capital crime. Any person caught in the act of burying one of them in the public road would surely have been put to death. In the western district of the island of Timor, where men and women are making long and tiring journeys, they fan themselves with leafy branches, which they afterwards throw away on particular spots where their forefathers did the same before them. The fatigue which they felt is thus supposed to have passed into the leaves and to be left behind. Others use stones instead of leaves. Similarly, in the Babar archipelago, tired people will strike themselves with stones, believing that they thus transfer to the stones the weariness which they felt in their own bodies. Then they throw away the stones in places which are specially set apart for the purpose. A like belief and practice in many distant parts of the world have given rise to these cairns or heaps of sticks and leaves, which travellers often observe beside the path, and to which every passing native adds his contribution in the shape of a stone, or stick, or leaf. Thus, in the Solomon and Banks Islands, the natives are wont to throw sticks, stones, or leaves upon a heap at a place of steep descent, or where a difficult path begins, saying, "There goes my fatigue." The act is not a religious rite, for the thing thrown on the heap is not an offering to spiritual powers, and the words which accompany the act are not a prayer. It is nothing but a magical ceremony for getting rid of fatigue, which the simple savage fancies he can embody in a stick, leaf, or stone, and so cast it from him. 2. Transference to animals. Animals are often employed as a vehicle for carrying away or transferring the evil. When a Moor has a headache, he will sometimes take a lamb or a goat and beat it till it falls down, believing that the headache will thus be transferred to the animal. In Morocco, most wealthy Moors keep a wild boar in their stables, in order that the jinn and evil spirits may be diverted from the horses and enter into the boar. Among the Kaffirs of South Africa, when other remedies have failed, natives sometimes adopt the custom of taking a goat into the presence of the sick man, and confess the sins of the kraal over the animal. Sometimes a few drops of blood from the sick man are allowed to fall on the head of the goat, which is turned out into an uninhibited part of the veld. The sickness is supposed to be transferred to the animal, and to become lost in the desert. In Arabia, when the plague is raging, the people will sometimes lead a camel through all the quarters of the town in order that the animal may take the pestilence on itself. Then they strangle it in a sacred place, and imagine that they have rid themselves of the camel and of the plague at one blow. It is said that when smallpox is raging, the savages of Formosa will drive the demon of the disease into a sow, then cut off the animal's ears and burn them or it, believing that in this way they rid themselves of the plague. Among the Malagasy, the vehicle for carrying away evils is called the faditra. The faditra is anything selected by the Sikidi, divining board, for the purpose of taking away hurtful evils or diseases that might prove injurious to an individual's happiness, peace, or prosperity. The faditra may be either ashes, cut money, a sheep, a pumpkin, or anything else the Sikidi may choose to direct. After the particular article is appointed, the priest counts upon it all the evils that may prove injurious to the person for whom it is made, and which he then charges the faditra to take away forever. If the faditra be ashes, it is blown to be carried away by the wind. If it be cut money, it is thrown to the bottom of deep water, or where it can never be found. If it be a sheep, it is carried away to a distance on the shoulders of a man, who runs with all his might, mumbling as he goes, as if in the greatest rage against the faditra, for the evils it is bearing away. If it be a pumpkin, it is carried on the shoulders to a little distance, and there dashed upon the ground with every appearance of fury and indignation. A Malagasy was informed by a diviner that he was doomed to a bloody death, but that possibly he might avert his fate by performing a certain rite. Carrying a small vessel full of blood upon his head, he was to mount upon the back of a bullock. While thus mounted, he was to spill the blood upon the bullock's head, and then send the animal away into the wilderness, whence it might never return. The Bataks of Sumatra have a ceremony which they call making the curse to fly away. When a woman is childless, A sacrifice is offered to the god